In the 1950s, America had broken free from the shackles of wartime economics. It was walking with the swagger of a nation that had the world by the tail. Scientists had harnessed nuclear energy. Jet-propelled airplanes were breaking speed records, and the race to space was on. But perhaps more than anything else, one thing melded imagination and consumerism, putting this era in perfect context. The concept car. Unlike satellites, rockets, and jet planes, these dream cars were accessible. People flocked to auto shows to see concept cars in their titanium-bodied glory. They were snapshots of how America perceived its future. They were simply out of sight, unforgettable. But what happened to them? Most were destroyed. Some just plain vanished. But amazingly, some are still here. Introducing the 1960 Plymouth XNR.
It had one fin in line with the driver. You know, you could almost call it a rocket car.
A rocket car that circled the globe.
This has taken a very, very weird path. And the nice thing about it is that we were able to trace it. And we were able to trace every step of it along the way.
And introducing the 1955 Chevrolet Biscayne.
The hubcaps were used on 57 Chevrolets. The taillights are off future Corvettes. The whole back end, if you take a look at it, looks just like a 60 Corvair.
It was a car ahead of its time. The XNR is the last concept car ever created by legendary designer Virgil Exner.
A new departure in automobile styling takes the road on Detroit proving grounds. The XNR Sportster is an idea car.
It's beyond eye-catching. The bright red sports car is a spaceship you can drive.
The XNR was really kind of the epitome of that, with this tall fin, low vehicle. I think it was like 43 inches tall. It was almost intended to be a one-person vehicle, really. It was a driving experience to drive that vehicle. As a matter of fact, the passenger actually sat 4 inches lower to reduce the drag on the car.
The car is a reflection of the times. Designed in '59 and unveiled in 1960, the Plymouth XNR embodies everything that was good about America at the time.
The economy in the United States was booming. Everybody was in a position to buy vehicles. People were looking for more modern vehicles, something that, you know, was personalized almost, that was colorful, that had chrome on it. And the industry was more than happy to oblige with that. And this was the time where the space race was just starting, putting men in space and satellites. The Jetsons were on TV, and everybody thought we were going to be driving flying cars back then. And the vehicles really reflected that. They had a jet look to really everything.
Virgil Exner was the man leading that charge.
Most collectors of the 1940s, 50s, 60 models, they know the name Virgil Exner. They know what he brought to the industry.
What he brought was low, sleek cars.
He lowered the automobile. As a matter of fact, Between 1954 and 57, the Chrysler products lowered by 6 inches, which is huge.
He also introduced the most iconic automotive feature of the decade.
It's really easy to recognize the Virgil Exner design. For the most part, the production cars, they're the ones with the fins on them. It first appeared in 1955, especially on the 300s, and each year grew a little bit. Kind of almost had a fin war going on here in Detroit with between Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Everybody's cars being a little more outlandish every year.
By 1959, the fad of tail fins was fading, and Virgil decided to send them out with a bang. Thus, the single, oversized, off-center fin that makes the XNR so distinctive.
It was asymmetrical in design. It was like a race car.
His son, Virgil Jr., a respected designer in his own right, recalls what his father was trying to do.
His whole concept is make the car look like it's going, because cars go, and so they should look like they go, and whatever it takes to make them look that way. In the 50s, fins was a way to do that. It was a carryover greatly from World War II and airplanes. It was a way to get the tail end up and to make a car look like a dart.
Nearly 3.5 feet high from the ground to the tip of its off-center stabilizing fin, the XNR carries streamlining farther than ever before.
It was powered by a Plant 6 engine, and it was modified to put out, I think, 250 horsepower. And so they drove it out at the Chrysler Proving Grounds and hit about 155 miles an hour to prove how fast it was.
In addition to speed, the XNR's engine produced electricity in a brand new way.
That was the first year for the alternator. Chrysler brought out an alternator to replace the starter generator, and that was a major improvement to the mechanical systems and the running of the vehicle.
This was critical, as more and more electric accessories were now being added to cars.
Radios were just then becoming popular in vehicles. Electric windshield wipers, more taillights, more headlights. So there was a need to put the power into the vehicle.
The XNR took its new technical marvels and space-age styling on the road. It was shown around the country and received rave reviews. Then it was shipped back to Europe, where the body had been constructed.
Back in those days, they were built in Italy by Ghia. Then they were brought into this country.
That required Chrysler to pay an import duty, but they found a loophole.
But they escaped having to pay a duty, provided within 2 years, it used to be, that they were sent back to where they were built or destroyed.
For most concept cars, that would be the end of the line. But not the XNR. Its life as a show car was over, but it was about to embark on an amazing journey around the world. The 1960 Plymouth XNR is instantly recognizable by its singular off-center tail fin. It has a look that is part space age and part child's toy. Even more incredible than its design elements is how it traveled the world, surviving political coups and civil wars.
It's quite a long story. The car was actually designed in Detroit by Virgil Exner. Virgil Exner had a lot of great ideas, a lot of wild ideas, and he had commissioned Ghia in Italy to actually build the body, the original concept body.
The finished vehicle was shipped to America, where it was a spectacular hit at auto shows across the country. Despite the public's reaction, it was never seriously considered for full-scale manufacturing.
Chrysler did not approve the car for production, and Ghia in Italy claimed ownership to it. From there, it was actually sold to a businessman, a butcher, in Switzerland. And once it arrived in Switzerland, he owned it for a while. And at that point in time, the Shah of Iran, Shah of Persia at that time, but the Shah of Iran, had been skiing Gstaad in Switzerland and had seen the car. And he approached the owner of the car, this businessman, and asked him if he could buy it, and he did. So the Shah of Iran, Persia at the time, shipped the car to Saudi Arabia, and he actually drove it. He drove it for quite some time. From there, he sold it to another gentleman in the Middle East who was a used car salesman, and from there it was sold in a roundabout way to this gentleman in Lebanon.
In 1975, civil war broke out in Lebanon, and the car disappeared underground. Only thanks to a very determined car lover named Kareem Eady did it return to the spotlight.
He actually hired young kids to go scour the neighborhoods and find anything unusual in cars, anything unusual. And lo and behold, they come back, and it was only about 500 meters from his house. And they said, we found something that we think is really cool. So he went to look at it, and immediately he recognized the car.
The Plymouth XNR was hidden in a basement. The owner had spent the last decade moving it from place to place around Beirut to protect it from being destroyed in the near-daily bombings. Eady bought the car and had it shipped to Canada, turning it over to Mario Van Ray and his team at RM Restorations in Blenheim, Ontario.
We received the car in 2008 on a table with all the other parts. The first step, of course, was to do the research to make sure everything was correct. From that point, it was just snowballing into the upholsterers, the mechanicals, that type of thing. Total restoration time did take us about 3.5 years on this car.
The biggest challenge in restoring a concept car is that there is no background information, no blueprints or technical manuals to consult, just old photos. The car's designer, Virgil Exner, had died 35 years ago, so Mario reached out to the only other person who knew the car intimately.
We discovered that his son was still alive, Virgil Exner Jr. He lived in South Bend, Indiana, and still does. We called him up one day, and we told him what we had, and he honestly couldn't believe it. He says because he didn't know where the car went, but as a child, he remembered driving in the car with his father. So we invited him up. It was quite emotional, as a matter of fact. When he seen the car at first and he put his hand on it, you know, there was tears in his eyes, saying that it brought back many memories, and it also brought back a lot of what his father was about.
Virgil Jr. did more than just reminisce. He provided his father's original drawings of the car and helped explain not just how it was built, but why, including a little secret about that signature tail fin.
The fin has actually got a bit of a curve towards the center of the car, which is not readily noticeable at first, but it is there, and it's there for a purpose because the fin is offset on the car, and driving at 150 mile an hour, the fin actually stabilizes the car center, and it was put there for a reason. People might look and say, oh, that fin is crooked. It's not crooked. It was designed that way, and it was written down that it was designed that way. Little things like that, they just keep finding over and over in the car. It makes it pretty unique.
It also makes it fun to drive.
I've had the opportunity to drive it quite a bit. At speed as well, which is a real thrill. It does have the power that it was designed to have. It is quite the car to drive. Handling, it handles great. There's a lot of features about this car that really make it a joy to drive. If it wasn't so darn expensive, you could drive it every day.
After the restoration was complete, it was sold at auction for just under $1 million to a private collector. It now sits in his collection next to a Dodge Polara. The Polara was a short-lived production car from 1960 and 61. It's the closest thing to a production XNR Chrysler ever made.
It's one of those vehicles that there's an aura about it because everybody knows that the Shah of Iran owned it for a while, that it disappeared into Lebanon for a while. Everybody knew it was special since the day it was built. So it's just for it to survive is amazing.
The incredible one-finned Plymouth serves as a shiny reminder of the decade of excess. It also carries a reminder of the man that designed it. Just to make sure he wasn't forgotten, Virgil Exner put his name right there on the trunk lid for everyone to see. XNR. The idea of a single off-center tail fin never caught on for production cars, but the 1955 Chevrolet Biscayne proved to be a goldmine of design cues for a decade's worth of production cars. In the 1950s, no one did auto shows like GM.
And they would have singers and dancers put on a show. And of course, General Motors was the largest corporation in the world at that time, had nothing but tons of money, so anything that they wanted to do or waste their money on, they could do without any problem.
In 1955, they put their money into a dream car called the Chevy Biscayne, a sports car utterly unlike anything on the market at the time.
It sat much lower, it was much smaller. It was a car that, even the color, green, was an unusual color to paint a concept car. Green is generally not considered a favorite color of the general public, but yet on that car it looks just right.
As a source for future design ideas, it was like one of those rare classic music albums that produces a half-dozen top 10 hits.
The wraparound windshield that goes into the roof was used in production in '59. The hubcaps were used on '57 Chevrolets. The front nose of the two front fenders was used on the '63, '64, '65 Rivieras. The whole back end, if you take a look at it, looks just like a '60 Corvair. The taillights are off future Corvettes. And the other styling cue on the Biscayne, of course, is the indented side, which went into the '56, '57 Corvette.
There are so many similarities. It's been called a four-door Corvette.
It's low like the Corvette. It's got a V8 engine like the Corvette. It's interesting that it has center door opening, and there is no post for the doors to catch on. They actually lock into the rocker panels.
As amazing as the car was then, and as beautiful as it is today, it's hard to believe what it's been through over the last 58 years. When the Chevrolet Biscayne hit the stage at the 1955 Motorama Dream Car Show, it was a dream come true for GM's marketing team.
Perhaps you dream about a low, sleek car like the Biscayne.
Some people sell the steak and some people sell the sizzle. So I would say that the concept cars are directly equivalent to the sizzle. And when you get the consumer's attention, then you bait and switch, and you switch them over to your production car.
But its time under the lights was brief.
They found out that the public doesn't like radical change. They like gradual change. And if you take them up too many notches too quickly, they're not going to go for it.
So the Biscayne concept was retired.
Well, the name Biscayne was used on production Chevrolets, but they never made a copy of that car, no.
for a concept car, retirement is not a pretty thing. Most concept cars are left in dusty warehouses or sent to the crusher. The Biscayne, it ended up in a junkyard in Michigan. It sat in a pile of twisted metal for 30 years. And it might still be there, if not for the keen eye of Joe Bortz. Joe saw this photo in a magazine and knew instantly there was a treasure amid the trash. There wasn't much left of the car except the fiberglass body and some scattered pieces of chrome.
When it was brought to the junkyard, the body was removed from the chassis, and the chassis was donated to a high school for its shop. So it was, when we got the car, the chassis was completely gone. We never had any hopes of getting the car in a running condition because it had a special chassis. We had no idea what it looked like.
Joe reassembled the body and left it resting on a pair of sawhorses. That's where it sat for another 10 years.
And then one day, a decade later, I got some pictures from General Motors that showed the Biscayne chassis before the body was mounted.
He took those photos to a custom car shop and had them build a brand new chassis to fit the restored body. Today, it's a fully functional car, and it's back to doing what it was built to do half a century ago. Amaze and excite thousands of car lovers.
If you look at a Van Gogh, you look at a Rembrandt, you can say, well, I mean, it's a canvas, it's got some paint on it, why do you go for it? You go for it because of the design, and it talks to you. And I think the design of these cars, we're talking to the people back then, they talk to the people now, and I think that that is the real intrinsic value of these cars.
Concept cars are built for the spotlight. But after their time on stage is over, their paths become unpredictable. The XNR ended up in a bombed-out basement in Beirut, while the Chevy Biscayne spent 30 years in a Michigan junkyard. Eventually, thankfully, they both have been restored and rest in the hands of loving private collectors.